The Basement Tenant, a novel, written by L.Z. Sinclaire, narrated by L.Z. Sinclaire. Cynthia Weaver lived in a brick bungalow on Vernon Avenue in Chatham, the South Side neighborhood that had been black middle class since the 1950s, the kind of block where the lawns were cut on Saturdays and the churches anchored the corners and the property values held because the people who lived there had decided, collectively and without discussion, that this was theirs and it would stay theirs, regardless of what the market or the city or the northward creep of gentrification had to say about it. Carrie had been to this house exactly 11 times during the marriage. She knew because she'd counted, the way she counted everything in those years, tracking her performance as Derek's wife the way a student tracked grades. Each visit to Cynthia's house a test she wasn't sure she was passing. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, Miles's baptism, 2 birthday parties, Cynthia's 65th and 67th. The rest were command appearances, family dinners where Derek sat at the head of the table in his parents' dining room, and Carrie sat beside him and tried to occupy a space that had never been designed for her. She parked on the street. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Cynthia would be home. She was always home in the afternoons, the rhythms of retirement having settled into a routine as fixed as the liturgical calendar. Morning walk, church committee at 10, home by noon, cooking by 2, television by 6, bed by 9. The schedule of a woman who had organized her life around service to her husband, her church, her community, and who, in the absence of her husband, had simply continued the routine, because the routine was the architecture, and the architecture was what held you upright. Carrie walked to the front door. She rang the bell. The chime was the same one from every visit, a 2-note electronic tone that somehow managed to sound dignified, as if even the doorbell had been raised to know its place. The door opened. Cynthia stood there. She was 68 and looked it. Not with the manufactured agelessness of the Lincoln Park mothers who fought time with the same resources they brought to every battle, but with the earned, unadorned authority of a woman who had lived every year of her life and didn't need anyone's opinion about how it showed. She was tall, taller than Carrie had remembered, or maybe Carrie had shrunk, with silver hair pulled back in a twist, dark skin that held the light like polished wood, and eyes that had been looking through people for so long they'd stopped needing to look at them. Caroline. Not Carrie, never Perry. Cynthia used her full name the way a judge used a defendant's, formally, distantly, with the understanding that familiarity was a privilege not yet earned. I need to talk to you. About what? Elias. The name landed in the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. Carrie watched the ripples move across Cynthia's face, not surprise, not fear, but the complicated rearrangement of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation for longer than Carrie could imagine, and was deciding, in the doorway of her house, whether the time had come. Come in, Cynthia said. The living room was a museum of the Weaver family's curated history. Photographs on every surface, framed, arranged, the visual narrative of a dynasty. William Weaver at a ribbon cutting, William Weaver with the mayor, Derek in his law school graduation robes, Derek and Carrie's wedding still on the mantle, which surprised Carrie until she realized it wasn't kept for her. It was kept for Miles, who stood between them in the photo, 6 months old, held in Derek's arms wearing a christening outfit that had belonged to William Weaver's father. Cynthia sat in the armchair by the window, her chair, the one with the worn arms and the reading light angled just so. She did not offer Carrie a seat. Carrie sat anyway, on the couch opposite, the couch where she'd sat during those 11 visits and felt the quiet, constant assessment of a woman who had never fully decided whether Carrie was worthy of her son. "You know about Elias?" "I've known about Elias since before he was born." "Tell me." Cynthia looked at her. The afternoon light through the window fell across her face in sections, illuminating the topography of a woman who had survived marriage to a powerful man and raised a powerful son and kept a secret that could have destroyed both. "William had an affair," she said, "in 1994, the year Derek graduated from law school. The woman was named Diane Corbin. She cleaned houses on the North Shore. She was 21 years old. And William was 42, married, a deacon at Cornerstone Baptist, chairman of the Community Development Council, father of a son who worshipped him." Cynthia's voice was level, each word delivered with a measured precision of testimony. "Diane came to the house once. She stood on this porch, right there where you were standing a minute ago, and told me she was pregnant. She was crying. She was terrified. She thought I would destroy her." "What did you do?" "I gave her a glass of water. I sat her down in this room and I told her the truth, that William Weaver was a great man in public and a small man in private, and that the distance between those two things was where other people's lives got crushed." Carrie sat very still. She had never heard Cynthia speak about William this way, with the cold, forensic clarity of a woman who had loved a man and measured his failures simultaneously, the way you measure a building's flaws without denying its architecture. I told her I would not help her, not because I didn't care, because I couldn't. If William's affair became public, the community center loses its naming rights, the scholarship fund gets scrutinized, the church asks questions. Derek's career, he was just starting, just building. Derek's career takes the hit, because in this world, the son pays for the father's sins, and the wife pays for both. "So you buried it." "I managed it." The distinction mattered to her. Carrie could see it in the way Cynthia's jaw tightened, the way the word buried had landed like an insult. "I told William it was over. He ended it. Diane had the baby. She named him Elias. She gave him her last name. She raised him alone." "Did William ever see him?" "Once. When the boy was 4, William drove to Inglewood and sat in his car outside Diane's apartment for 20 minutes. He didn't go in. He told me about it that night, in this room, sitting in that chair you're sitting in. He cried. The only time I ever saw William Weaver cry. But he didn't claim him? He didn't claim him, because claiming him meant destroying everything else, the center, the fund, the family name, Derek.
Cynthia's voice hardened. You want to judge that. I can see it in your face. The white liberal judgment. The idea that the right thing is always the brave thing. That secrets are always sins. That the truth will set you free. She leaned forward. Let me tell you something about the truth, Caroline. The truth is a luxury. You can afford it because your family's name is on a street in Winnetka, not on a community center in Inglewood. You can afford the truth because nothing in your life depends on the fiction. The words hit like a slap, not because they were cruel, because they were right, and because Carrie knew the exact shape of the rightness. Whitefield Drive, a cul-de-sac off Green Bay Road that her grandfather had developed in 1952 on land acquired cheaply from owners who had been prevented by covenant from buying it back. Her father had never discussed this directly. He discussed vision, work ethic, the risks he'd taken. The street bore the family name because the family had earned it, and the earning had happened in a specific decade using specific instruments that did not survive examination. And Carrie had known this since she was 22, had found it in a county record search while working a Tribune piece on North Shore land use. A story about the present that kept pulling her into the past, into documents that named her own family in the bloodless administrative language of mid-century exclusion. She'd narrowed the scope of the story, published something that didn't include the Whitfields, told herself it was journalistic ethics, you don't make yourself the story, and had spent years not examining whether that was principles or cowardice.
So, when Cynthia said the truth is a luxury, Carrie recognized in the heat of it the same argument she'd been having with herself since before the divorce. The argument about what she could afford, what she could risk, what the cost of honesty was when the currency was a child's school and a house and a neighborhood that only existed because it was built on a foundation of curated appearances. Derek knows, Carrie said. Derek has always known. He was 23 when Diane came to the door. He was in law school. He sat in the hallway and listened to every word. And when you say he reached out to Elias 2 years ago, I say it the way I mean it. Derek contacted Elias. I told him not to. I said, leave that boy alone. He has a life. He doesn't need us. Derek didn't listen. Derek never listens when he's decided he knows better, which is always. Why did he contact him? Cynthia was quiet for a long time. In the silence, Carrie could hear the house, the tick of a clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of a television in a back room that Cynthia had left on for company. The sounds of a woman who lived alone in a house full of photographs of the people she'd lost. Because Derek needed someone, Cynthia said finally. Someone who was family but not family. Someone he could use without guilt because he'd never given the boy anything, so the boy couldn't refuse. Derek saw Elias the way he sees everything, as a resource, a tool, an asset to be deployed. She paused. Her hands were in her lap, the fingers interlaced, the knuckles prominent. The hands of a woman who had spent decades working, first as a nurse, then as the unpaid administrator of a family legacy that required constant maintenance. You have to understand something about my son, Cynthia said. Derek is not a bad man. That would be simpler. Bad men are easy to leave, easy to hate, easy to explain to a judge. Derek is a man who believes his own story. He believes he is building something, the company, the legacy, the portfolio. He believes it serves the community. He believes the properties he acquires will be developed responsibly, that the neighborhoods will benefit, that the displacement is temporary. He has told himself a story in which he is the hero, and the story is so beautiful and so complete that he cannot hear the sound of the people it requires to be silent. People like Margaret O'Say. I don't know about Margaret O'Say, she said it firmly. I don't know the specifics, but I know the shape. I've known the shape for 2 years. I heard Derek on the phone with Cross talking about holdouts and reluctant sellers and creative solutions. I heard the language, and I am not a fool, Caroline. I was a nurse for 35 years. I know what it sounds like when someone is describing a body as a problem to be managed. You didn't say anything. To whom? The police? My son is one of the most connected men in Chicago. The alderman? The alderman is his partner. You? She let the question sit. You were falling apart. You were on medication. You were losing your house. What would you have done if I'd come to you and said, your ex-husband is doing something terrible and I can't prove it? You would have used it as a weapon in the custody case, and Derek's attorney would have turned it around and said you were conspiring with his estranged mother to fabricate allegations. I know how this works. I have watched it work for 40 years. Carrie had no response, because Cynthia was right about the system, right about the risk, right about the devastating pragmatism of a woman who had learned that silence, however damning, was sometimes the only position that didn't make things worse. He put Elias in my house. Yes, to control you, to have someone in the building who reported to him, to make sure you behaved the way his custody motion needed you to behave. Erratic, unstable, unfit.
But Elias isn't doing that. Cynthia's expression changed. The hardness softened, not to warmth exactly, but to something more complicated. The look of a woman recognizing an outcome she hadn't predicted. No, she said, he isn't. He's looking for Margaret O'Say. The name sat in the room like smoke. Cynthia didn't flinch. She didn't ask who Margaret was. She just looked at Carrie with the full, terrible knowledge of a woman who had been holding secrets for 30 years and was watching, one by one, as they climbed out of the basements where she'd put them. I don't know anything about that, she said, and then more quietly, but I know my son, and I know that Derek is capable of things that would break your heart if you still had one to break. I still have one. Cynthia studied her. The assessment was the same one Carrie had felt during every visit, the weighing, the measuring, the careful evaluation of a woman who had spent a decade wondering whether her son's white wife understood anything real about the family she'd married into. Maybe you do, Cynthia said. Maybe you do. She rose from the chair. I'm going to make tea, you're going to sit there, and then I'm going to tell you something about that boy in your basement that you need to hear. She went to the kitchen. Carrie sat on the couch and looked at the photographs. William and Cynthia, young, beautiful, standing in front of the community center with the future in their hands. Derek at 5, at 10, at 25. Miles at his christening, tiny and perfect, held by a family that contained in its architecture a room no one spoke about and a son no one claimed. She waited. Cynthia returned with 2 cups of tea, plain, no sugar, served in china that belonged to her mother. She sat down. She took a sip. She set the cup on the table with the deliberate care of a woman who had been holding something she had been holding for a very long time.
When Diane died, Cynthia said, Elias was 21. He came to the funeral alone. He sat in the back of the church in Inglewood, and he didn't speak to anyone, and he left before the burial. I was there. I went alone. William was gone by then, and Derek didn't know I went.
I sat 6 rows behind Elias, and I watched the back of his head for an hour, and I thought, that is my husband's son, and he is alone, and I helped make him alone. Her voice didn't break. It was steady as a beam. I followed him out. I caught him on the sidewalk. He looked at me, and I saw William's face, the jawline, the eyes, the way he held his shoulders. He knew who I was. I could see it. And I said the only honest thing I've said in 30 years. I said, I'm sorry. What did he say? He said, it's too late for that. Cynthia looked at her tea. He was right. It was too late, but he said it without anger. He said it the way you say something you've already made peace with, not forgiving, not bitter, just finished. And that's when I knew he was stronger than any of us, stronger than William, stronger than Derek, stronger than me. She looked up at Carrie. Her eyes were dry. The strength in them was not the performed strength of a public matriarch. It was the real kind, the kind that comes from holding a family together by holding yourself apart from it, by keeping the secrets that would destroy the people you'd sworn to protect. If Elias is in your house and he's looking for a missing woman, Cynthia said, then he's doing what none of us ever did. He's trying to find someone who got lost in the machinery. And if Derek put him there for his own reasons, then Elias is doing what he always does, taking what's been given to him and turning it into something else, something better than what it was meant to be. Carrie set her tea down. She leaned forward. Will you help me? Elias looked at her for a long time. The clock in the hallway ticked. The television murmured. The house breathed.
I have been protecting my son for 40 years, Cynthia said, and I am tired. I am so tired, Caroline. I know you don't, but you will. She picked up her tea. She took a sip. What do you need? I need to know everything. The properties, the LLC, what Derek told you, what you overheard, everything. Cynthia closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted, a release, a collapse, the quiet surrender of a woman setting down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it had a bottom. Get your notebook, she said, the journalist one. You're going to need it. And Carrie got it, the legal pad she'd bought at the Walgreens on Clark, the one she'd kept in her bag the way she'd kept her reporter's notebook at the Tribune, the talisman of a former self she was learning to reclaim. She sat on Cynthia Weaver's couch with the legal pad on her knee and the pen in her hand, and she wrote while Cynthia talked. Cynthia talked for 2 hours. She talked about the phone call she'd overheard, Derek and Cross, the logistics of property acquisition, the language of holdouts and incentives and relocation. She talked about the dinner where Cross had come to the house and she'd served them pot roast while they discussed neighborhood development over her dining table, their voices low and collegial, and she'd stood in the kitchen and listened through the wall and heard enough to know that what they called development was something else entirely. She talked about William, the man she'd married, the man she'd protected, the man whose secret had shaped their family like a fault line shapes a landscape, invisibly, permanently, defining the terrain even when you couldn't see the crack. She said, I loved William. I will go to my grave having loved him, but love and accountability are not the same thing, and I spent 40 years pretending they were. And the pretending is what allowed the harm. She talked about Elias, about the boy she'd seen at his mother's funeral, sitting in the back of the church alone, about the years she'd thought about him, not constantly, not with the consuming guilt of a person who acknowledges their complicity, but in the way you think about a mistake.
Occasionally, involuntarily, in the moments between sleep and waking when the mind presents its inventory of regrets. I could have helped him, Cynthia said. I could have sent money. I could have been present. I could have been the grandmother he never had, but I chose the family I already had over the family I was being asked to accept, and the choice was selfish, and the selfishness had consequences I am only now beginning to see. Carrie wrote. She filled 6 pages. She wrote with the fast, cramped hand of a reporter who knows that the source is talking, and the talking might stop at any moment, and the words must be captured before they evaporate. When Cynthia finished, they sat in the quiet living room, 2 women who had been connected by a man, separated by a divorce, and reunited by a crime. And the tea was cold, and the light through the window had shifted from afternoon to early evening, and the house on Vernon Avenue held them both in its careful South Side dignity. And nothing between them was resolved, and everything between them had changed.
The end. You have been listening to The Basement Tenant, written by L.V. Sinclaire, narrated by L.V. Sinclaire. Thank you for listening.